Royalty. Royalty.
You ready? Okay. Shalom. So today, or this evening, we're going to briefly talk about the difference between modern Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, and Yiddish. So I know there's this, I guess, an argument out there that says that if you're teaching Hebrew, that it's Yiddish, or how a person's teaching Hebrew is Yiddish, or how you pronounce words makes it Yiddish. And so we're going to look at and see, one, what the Jews say Yiddish is, and then we're going to look at modern Hebrew and then biblical Hebrew and see if there is a difference just by searching. So, you know this guy right here?
Shalom.
That's my... What are you? No, this is my husband. This is my Ish, Yoshiyahu. And you can find his teachings. I know a lot of guys ask me. You can find his teachings on his YouTube channel. It's More Yoshiyahu. And Yoshiyahu is spelled Yoshiyahu. And we would make that shorter, but we don't know how to change it. Right. So, okay, so we're going to do this together. We've been talking about this kind of a lot today. So we're on the Jewish Facts website, you know, it's where Jewish gives facts about Jews. And so, obviously, right here, you have them quoting themselves. Right here it says, 1798 Yiddish, a language without rules, mutilated and unintelligible, without our circle, must be completely abandoned. So this is the Haskalah Jewish Enlightenment movement, okay? And then Yiddish has not yet said its last word. And so I guess it's some other kind of Jewish quote from 1978. So the Yiddish language was at one time the international language of Ashkenazic Jews. So these are the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe and their descendants. A hybrid of Hebrew and medieval German. Yiddish takes about 3/4 of its vocabulary from German, but borrows words liberally from Hebrew and many other languages from the many lands where Ashkenazic Jews live. So let me start off by saying, I don't know German. Never taken one German class. Wouldn't be able to tell you the first things about German. So me teaching the way I teach, I wouldn't know how to do it if I didn't know German, if this was a Germanic language, okay? If what I was doing was using Germanic language. I don't know any German. And the words that are used in biblical Hebrew are biblical Hebrew words.
Correct.
We were talking about this, the interesting, of this being interesting fact. This is the Ashkenazic Jewish language, and the biblical Hebrews obviously are not Ashkenazic.
Right. So what we have in the Ashkenazi language versus the biblical Hebrew language, of course, is the root or the foundation of the language itself. So the root and foundation of biblical Hebrew is from the African people who obviously wrote the language. And when we study the Bible, what we have is a biblical language that is Hebrew. It's the root of the language, which all the people, whether they're Ashkenazic or not, anybody who is familiar with biblical Hebrew will tell you that biblical Hebrew and what is spoken today as modern Hebrew or Yiddish or whatever, they'll tell you it is two totally different things.
So when you said that, because I always want to make sure that when we say something, we clarify it. You said African people. So Hebrew spoken by African people. So can you clarify what you mean by Hebrew spoken by African people?
Okay, so the original language Hebrew was spoken by, they say now it's Afro-Asiatic a language, and it basically has to do with the region. And if you are able to look online at a map, you will see the continent of Africa really does stretch further than what they try to tell you. Of course, after Great Britain began to divide everything, they then renamed it. But the continent itself is an African continent. And the Asia part of what they call Afro-Asiatic has to do with the fact that a lot of the African people migrated up into Asia. So the language has its roots in Africa, whereas Yiddish has its roots in German and other languages up north, so in Europe. So two totally different places where the language starts.
Okay, so just to give you a visual, I know this isn't the best visual, but if you know anything about maps, Israel is in here, right in here. So you see where the Arabian Plate, or what they call the Arabian Plate, begins. This line where the African Plate is, where you see this dark line, literally divides Israel into Africa, and then leaves the rest of this side, obviously, on what they consider the Arabian Plate. You made another statement about the Hebrew language, the modern Hebrew language, and Yiddish. And so one of the things that I want to bring out was there is a difference between Yiddish and what they speak in modern Hebrew. And the reason why, and not to validate or invalidate anything, but to tell you what happened when the Jewish people went back into Israel, is because of them speaking Yiddish, which is picking up pieces of languages from all the places that those
that the people went.
The Jewish people went.
Yeah.
Then when they came back into Israel in 1948, during the time when they said was the rebirth of their nation, which obviously we know otherwise, what happened is they could not really communicate because all of their words were different. They had blended Hebrew characters into German words. So if the word was like Hafaslaf, I don't know any German, they would take like a hey and a pay and then make it a German word, right? So it didn't take anything necessarily away from Hebrew as much as that word is nowhere biblically in Hebrew, and no person who spoke ancient Hebrew or biblical Hebrew would have understood it. So what happened is one of their people, and I can't remember it, if you have Shalom Sesame, they tell the story like 50 million times, but what he did was he decided to take the Hebrew words that were in the biblical Hebrew and then make them modern. Okay, so a word like the word for potato is tapuz eretz, right? So it's the earth apple, right? So they tried to take words that were in Hebrew and then apply them to modern things. Not saying either one is right, but modern Hebrew obviously actually uses Hebrew. So all the Jews who migrated actually had to learn Hebrew. They did not speak Hebrew when they were in Europe. They had to come back to Israel and then had to learn biblical Hebrew, and then they added words to it. Okay, so on the channel though, if you've noticed, I don't teach you how to speak Hebrew. I'm teaching you how to look up biblical Hebrew words and define them based upon the culture and the context.
Right, correct. Because the emphasis that we are, what we try to emphasize in our teaching is to get back to the original foundational truths of the Bible. That's the goal. It's not to teach you how to speak Hebrew. It's to teach you how to do the research so that you can get back to the actual roots, which is in the alphabet. And without really going too deep into that, just know that the Hebrew language, the language of the Hebrew people, was a language that was not exclusive just to them. Right. There were other nations and cultures and people that surrounded the Hebrews that
spoke that same dialect. So the Canaanites spoke Hebrew. Even interestingly, because the nations around, so the Babylonians obviously spoke a form of the Hebrew or the Semitic language, and so it's a Afro-Asiatic language.
Yes, and don't ever forget the fact that most of the Egyptian people spoke Hebrew, and most of the Hebrews do not speak Egyptian.
Correct.
They went back and forth. They traded. It was walking distance.
They were bioagricultural Semitic languages that were spoken in the region. That's why it's called a Semitic language group, with Hebrew being an Afro-Asiatic language. Which is interesting because Arabic is a really good tester for people who are speaking Hebrew, who want to know if they're speaking something very similar to what the biblical Hebrew people spoke. Because Arabic is an old language that has not stopped being spoken, as because of our diaspora, our language and our time of speaking our language was broken up, obviously. But Arabic, if you know Arabic, you know 50% of Hebrew. And if you know Hebrew, you know 50% of Arabic, because the languages are very, very closely related. So to say that a person is speaking a Caucasian or a fake Yiddish language where the language lines up heavily with the Arabic language and Amharic language. If you know the Ethiopians, they speak Amharic, which is also Afro-Asiatic language based upon characters that's closely related to the Semitic Hebrew language.
And just to make a quick note, we have to really be careful when we talk about a fake language, because the idea of a fake language means nobody understands it. What would be probably better is to say, I'll maybe use the word pure or something like that, because English uses a mixture of different languages, and so it doesn't make it right. But it's not fake because we're obviously speaking it.
Right.
So the emphasis that this is all about is to show you that biblical Hebrew is a language that is, and of course we don't have the perfect the records of the but it is a more pure language, and that's what we're trying to teach. We're not teaching Yiddish. We don't know Yiddish because we don't know German, and obviously you can't teach Yiddish without knowing German.
Right.
But we are studying the best we can to understand the original language of the Bible, so that we can teach the truths of Yah's word to His people. That's really kind of what this is all about.
Right. So as we go back, and what we're trying to do is add not just using the language but the culture, and I think that's
Very
what makes the biggest difference, because if it's not functional culturally, then it doesn't work in the language either.
Right.
So
Correct.
while we are using the language, and I spoke about it in previous videos, if you go to the beginning Hebrew video, I talk about the difference in these scripts and the forms. And just because a picture or the way we look at a picture changes doesn't necessarily mean the meaning behind the picture changes.
Exactly.
And that's what we're always careful of when we're looking at these words and translating them, so that we don't get caught up using words that are not biblical Hebrew. They have to follow the context and the culture of those people, not modern day Jewish people, but of the people in Scripture.
Oh, by the way, we were talking about this before we actually went on air, and that was, let's not ever make the mistake of saying because you use a particular script that you're automatically using a particular language. Because the script of the language, the actual way you write it, is not as important when it comes to Hebrew as what the characters actually mean.
Correct.
Because Hebrew is the only language that we know of on the planet that every letter is a picture, every letter is a word, some letters can be an actual sentence. I mean, it gets deep. When you add them together, they have to make sense pictorially, they have to make sense numerically, they have to make sense contextually. And so just because you use a particular way to write, say, an aleph, as long as it doesn't change the meaning of what the aleph is, then we're not going to get into that argument of whether or not the way you wrote it is right or wrong. I guess, is that the point we're trying to make?
Right. And also, I wouldn't say only Hebrew used pictures.
Oh, right.
to string
Okay,
these
of course
words
not.
together.
Yeah.
Because obviously a lot of the people did it,
course.
but the unique, I think, thing about the Hebrew language, the Semitic language, is that if everything is based in bioagriculture, so it's something that you can see, touch, taste, smell, and feel, and so it's something you can always go back to and get a concrete meaning. While now you can use a character or a picture, and the picture can change over time, where the picture never changes over time with Hebrew, because Yah built a language around, obviously, a family, a tribe, the land, and the stuff that surrounds the people.
Yeah, and just to kind of put a little, because it's exactly right. A lot of people, most of the languages, African languages and Afro-Asiatic languages, were based on picture. So yeah, I didn't mean to say it like that. What I was saying is, through through archaeology, we've been able to go and dig up the actual original writings, the original letters, and their meanings. And this, through the research and through anthropology, we've discovered that a lot of people like using the aleph because it's the first letter, understand what that is and what it represented to a family. Right. It was the strongest domesticated animal that was used on a daily basis by a family. So it represented strength and power and champion. So my point is this: you're not speaking or teaching or using Yiddish because you use a modern script of Hebrew.
Right, because using Yiddish, I mean, if you're talking about the Japheth in that area, they wouldn't have even had the cultural markers to even make those kind of connections to the language. That's why if you really watch a lot of Jewish teachers and people who are not necessarily into, or who are probably more into like Kabbalah and dealing with a lot of gematria and the deeper meaning of the word, it's because they don't have a cultural Afro-Asiatic Semitic connection to the language. And so a lot of the stuff that they do is from the Zohar and from these things. Not saying that you cannot look at the letters in the language and come up with things that are there. I'm not saying that, because obviously Yah linked his language to creation. So yes, you can meditate and look around and see connections between things in the Hebrew language, and there wouldn't be an error. But a lot of their focus is more in that area because they don't have the Afro-Asiatic cultural connection to an aleph and an ox, and to a dalet and a door, and to a bet and a tent and a house, because they didn't live in tents and houses. They lived in caves and...
Right. Oh, and by the way, please don't ever think that the quote-unquote people in the land today are not learning this language just like you're learning this language right now.
Correct.
All throughout California, I know that's where we are, but in the United States of America, there are schools that are set up by the Ashkenazi Jewish people to teach their children how to understand Hebrew. It's just like what we're doing. And it's something that I've talked to a couple of rabbis. One guy told me that they speak Hebrew fluently in their family, but every year he goes back for 3 months to learn Hebrew. Why? Because it's really actually not their native language.
Correct.
Their native language is German. For this particular guy, it was German, but they're from all over the place. So they're learning Hebrew just like we're learning Hebrew.
Right.
The difference, I think, is most of us who grew up culturally close to the Hebrew language seem to be able to grasp some of the concepts of it contextually better because we lived it.
I hate you, but they're black. Like, there's a lot of things that we do that are connected to it that they don't see these idioms and these things, and they don't connect them because we inherently just do certain things. One of the things I wanted to bring out too is that a lot of the even in the Jewish groups where they're learning Hebrew, for liturgy and for what they believe is for religious purposes, they know the difference too. And a lot of, if you look at them, a lot of them will tell you Yiddish has no connection to the biblical Hebrew language. They have no issue with that. So I just wanted to show you this before we kind of shut down. There's a chart, and it talks about the difference between Hebrew and Yiddish. And so one is Afro-Asiatic Semitic, West Semitic, Central Semitic, Northwest Semitic, Canaanite, Hebrew language family. The other one is an Indo-European, Germanic, West Germanic, High Germanic, Yiddish. Okay?
Before you go any further, I want you just to read that paragraph in the very beginning. At the top, right here.
This one?
Where it says Hebrew and Yiddish are...
Oh, okay. Hebrew and Yiddish are languages spoken by Jews all over the world. Interestingly, Hebrew and Yiddish are very dissimilar, even though both languages use Hebrew alphabets in their scripts. While Hebrew is a Semitic language, subgroup of Afro-Asiatic languages like Arabic and Amharic, Yiddish is a German dialect which uses many Hebrew words, but with a very distinctive Ashkenazic pronunciation.
Right. I just wanted to make sure we got that out so that you will see that the writings of the people who studied this came up with this. This wasn't something me and you came up with.
Right.
They're letting you know, okay, yeah, this is the difference. And they're very dissimilar. He didn't say they're very similar. So they're very different.
So it tells you the ranking, where it's spoken. Obviously, it's global as liturgical language, obviously for Judaism, West Bank, Gaza. Then you have Yiddish spoken in all these places, obviously heavily populated by Ashkenazic Jews. United States, Israel, Argentina, Brazil, United Kingdom, Russia, Canada, Ukraine. All these places where Jews went, obviously after the Holocaust and pre-Holocaust. Okay, so obviously pronunciation, it's Ivrit. One is Israel. You have all these places in Russia and Sweden. So as you see, it's not a language that's linked, obviously, to the biblical nation of the Hebrew people. So believe me, we're not here teaching you Yiddish. It would be a waste of my time to be a waste of your time. We're teaching you the basis of the Hebrew language through the culture and the context using a modern script only because all of our resources are written in modern script. If we would flip all of our resources and put them in Paleo-Hebrew or pictographical Hebrew, then we would use pictographical Hebrew. But I know, because of my studies, and obviously my Yish knows from his studies, that if you pick up a book and I only teach you Paleo-Hebrew, then you're not going to, every lexicon, every Bible, you'll never be able to actually look at and read letters in the actual Hebrew script. So let's be careful when we say these things. So a lot of these doctrines are I guess rooted in one camp doctrine where people found it unimportant to learn Hebrew because once you learn Hebrew, people cannot twist the scriptures on you.
Oh, that's true.
And so a person not teaching you Hebrew, what biblical, modern script or whatever, is withholding some portion of information. Because if a person learns modern script, guess what you're going to do? You're going to say, okay, now I've learned modern script, now let me go learn Paleo. And now let me go learn pictographical. You're going to start putting these things together. But anytime a person withholds any portion of something from you and then rids it away with some BS definition saying it's Yiddish and not even doing the proper study to figure out whether or not it is or is what you say it is not okay. A teacher should never withhold information. A student should be able to explore and then...
As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why the Christian doctrine is so dangerous. Because for so many years they said, this doesn't apply to you, so it's no reason for you to study it.
Right.
And now we find that same kind of mindset creeping in to the actual Hebrew Israelite fellowships. And that is, Hebrew doesn't really matter, it don't apply to you, it's old and it's all messed up, it's corrupt, so don't study it. No, we do need to learn the language as best as we can with the tools that we have now, because it is our language and it does help define and identify truths in the scriptures and make them just a little more clear. So we don't want to get into a whole discussion on how important it is, because it's very important. But what we're just trying to clear up is that we have not, nor do we plan to ever in the future, teach Yiddish to anyone. We're just trying to use the language to get to the original meaning of the writer so that we can glean the truths that the Most High put in that Bible, in that manuscript that we study. We want to be able to get and glean the truths from that to apply it to our lives, to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world.
Said it better than that, could. Yeah.
Wow, that was the first. So, all right. I hope you enjoy your Shabbat, and shalom, shalom.
Power to the chosen people.